Welcome back, YouTube. This is your girl T coming live and direct from T's Corner. I apologize for the quality of this video. Unfortunately, I had some technical difficulties, and so I had to switch to a different device, and the video quality is much lower. I apologize for that. So this is part 2 of my review of Lovecraft Country Season 1, Episode 1, Sundown. And at this point, we've left Tick somewhere outside of Kentucky, and we're in Chicago. And coming into Chicago, the song that's playing is Etta James' I Just Want to Make Love to You. And the music in this show is its own character. You will see as we go through these 10 episodes that the music plays a very important role, and even though this show is set in 1950s Jim Crow era America, mostly south side of Chicago, the music will be from very different eras. So the songs fit the scene regardless of the time in which they were released. And I think that kind of lends to the there is nothing new under the sun type of thing, and what was going on then is going on now, and that's both in the positive and in the negative. As you will see, as African Americans in this country, we have always had a hard way to go. There's always been difficulties and hurdles, and that hasn't changed, unfortunately. Neither have lynchings and senseless murders. And we're going to get into all that as the season progresses. So, as I said, right now we're in Chicago, Southside Chicago. And the song that's playing is Etta James' I Just Want to Make Love to You. And cut to the bedroom of George and Hippolyta Freeman. Now, I say Hippolyta because I listened to the Matt Ruff novel of Lovecraft Country after I watched this episode for the first time on Audible. And the reader on Audible says Hippolyta. The show, and it's my understanding, according to Jonathan Majors, that Michael K. Williams was the first person to say the character's name at a table read, and they've just gone with that, and he pronounced it Hippolyta. Correction, Hippolyta. So we've gone from Hippolyta to Hippolyta. So if I say it either way, I'm talking about the same person, just so we know. So we cut to the bedroom south side of Chicago. We have George Freeman, played by Courtney P. God, I cannot talk today. Courtney B. Vance. Sorry. And Hippolyta Freeman, played by Aunjanue Ellis. Both of these actors are phenomenal. We've seen them in many different things, and they're always awesome. And let's just say that the Emmy snub to Aunjanue Ellis for Dr. Maddie Moss Clark, not good. Not good at all. She played the mess out of that role, and I personally think she should have been recognized. My own personal opinion, apparently the Academy at the Emmys didn't agree with that, but she's an amazing actress. She always sucks you right into the character. She completely embodies the character, and I think she should have been nominated. I still think Regina King would have won because she killed that, but she should have definitely been nominated. So I digress. There I go, getting off. Y'all know how I do. So they're, a more mature couple, and this is their lovemaking scene, which is amazing. But before they get to the lovemaking, they deal with just everyday things that couples may go through. But I guess it's different in 1950s than it would be now. And so she's suggesting that she go out on a guide trip. Now, the guide trip was sort of like the Green Book progression or putting together. The guides would go out to different areas around the United States travel to these areas and see the welcome that they received to determine whether these were safe travel places for Negroes at that time, or whether this was somewhere you were definitely gonna get lynched or have a problem or would not be welcome. And she wrote articles for his travel guide. And she said, I write those articles based on what you tell me when you get back and on your notes. Could you imagine how much greater it would be if I went out and did my own notes and wrote my articles and my stories from my own notes as opposed to yours? Because right now, I'm pretty much the best writer you have. And that's not even with firsthand knowledge. His concern is that if his wife is out on a guide trip and encounters some of the racist bigots that he's encountered and, been subjected to bodily harm, what they would do to her as a black woman out on these highways and in these towns alone. That's something we'll have to touch on later. And I apologize, but like I said in the first video, I'm already 8 episodes in, and tonight is episode 9. So I have other information now, which is abnormal from the way I usually do my reviews, where I don't have that information. So after they discuss that, and she's offended that he would question why she should go out on a guide trip, but not him. And she mentions that she has some pecans in the kitchen that need to be turned into pies for the block party. So there's apparently a block party going on this day. And before you get to the scene in their bedroom, you travel up the street. So you see that people are preparing. There are people outside grilling. The kids are playing in the water, the fire hydrant, and doing that type of thing. So we're going to guess it's summer, because when do you open the fire hydrant? In the summer. So summer of 1955, south side of Chicago. And I think the really nice thing about this, and it was something that I heard Viola Davis, had to think about that. It was something that I heard Viola Davis say when talking about taking on the role of Annalise Keating. And she says, women of her age aren't thought to be, the sex symbol. They aren't thought to have that romantic side. And with the writing for Annalise Keating, she was able to explore all of that on film, which is actually real life. You don't, stop having a love life because you age. It changes. It could be different. I don't know, because I don't have one. But it was like seeing older people, people in your 40s and 50s who you don't think of as sex symbols, or you don't think of in that intimate way, being intimate, and doing a bang up job at it for the cameras, but just for reality's sake. These are things that happen every day in American homes. So that was really neat to me, just to see that full-on adult relationship where they're dealing with boundaries as far as the travel guide is concerned, but also just being together and being free. And their daughter is in the next room, and Hippolyta says, Dee's awake, these walls are thin. So they go on and they make love, and then the sounds are carrying through these thin walls. And their daughter Diana, played by Jada Harris, who goes by Dee, is in the living room drawing, and apparently is a very gifted artist. And she's in the living room drawing while there's a picture of her mother sitting directly in front of her on the table, which we will later learn was inspiration for what she was drawing. And she hears them, and her reaction is, ugh, gross. And for anybody who has ever witnessed, accidentally opened the door on, or heard their parents making love, it is always the grossest thing ever. I speak from experience. Did I mention the song that was playing? I know I talked about it, but I'm not even sure if I actually said what it was. It's Etta James' I Just Want to Make Love to You. And then you have George and Hippolyta making love. So, like I said, the soundtrack is its own character, And whoever is in charge of picking this stuff, I don't know if it's Misha Green or who is in charge of the soundtrack to this show, but it's amazing. So as Dee goes to the kitchen to get away from the sounds of her parents making love, she goes to pull up the shade at the kitchen window at the fire escape and screams because she sees her cousin Atticus coming up the fire escape. And apparently he's war vet. He hasn't been home for a while, so they're all excited and happy to see him. And George and Hippolyta make their way from the bedroom to come and find out why Dee screamed and see that their nephew has returned home. And I think that was just, like a preliminary to welcome him back to Chicago, because we see him walking, in the last scene on the highway outside of Kentucky after the bus incident. And it doesn't, there is no whole lot of family reconnecting. It's just, hey, welcome home, hugs, little joy. And then we move on to Uncle George. They live above a store. I don't know what kind of store it is, because it looks like a store and then it looks like the neighborhood mechanic. So I don't know what it is. A lot of stuff going on in one building is what I'm coming up with. And he's speaking to somebody about double checking a tip for the guidebook, because he says a bad tip in the guidebook can get someone killed. And he tells Tick to hold on while he's speaking to this gentleman. And while Tick is waiting, he picks up a book written by H.P. Lovecraft called The Outsiders and Others. Now, as I said before, H.P. Lovecraft was a sci-fi horror author, and was also a notorious racist. So when his Uncle George sees that he's picked up that book, he says that's like coming home or visiting old friends or something like that. And Tick says yes. And then he says on the creation of Negroes. And Uncle George says that that's not one of Lovecraft's writings you hear much about. And Tick says that his father made him memorize that as respectable, and then tried to steer him to more respectable reading than what he was getting, or what he was borrowing from the shop beneath Uncle George's house. That's, a bookshop and looks like a store, and the mechanic. Like I said, it's a whole lot of stuff going on in that one building. But I, having already read that H.P. Lovecraft was a notorious racist, didn't feel the need to read any of his writings. However, I did search out the poem on the creation of niggers. Very short, very crude. It is what it is. He was who he was. And I say it like that because, unfortunately, it's nothing new. I'm 40 years old. This show is set 25 years before I was born. So that's 65 years and nothing's changed. I digress. An important thing to notice is that as he's getting reacquainted with old friends, he turns the book to the side and you see that it's published by Arkham Publishing, which is going to make a difference when he reads the letter that the letter that I spoke about earlier that was tucked into the book The Princess of Mars was written from his father, who's been missing for about 2 weeks. And when his uncle says about 2 weeks, he's like, are you not sure how long he's been gone? I apologize for the movement. My back is killing me. I'm uncomfortable today. I have sciatica. Every now and then it gives me the blues. But he says that you're not sure how long he's been missing. And his Uncle George makes the statement, when he's gone off of that sauce, how he is, which lets us know that Atticus's father is an alcoholic. And that's also another, I won't say character, but it's a characteristic of Montrose as we delve into these characters and who they are, and we get more backstory on them. Kind of helps you understand where some things come from. Whether you agree or not, it gives you a better understanding. After Uncle George makes the statement about how Montrose gets when he's on the sauce, he says, so I don't know where he could have gone. And Tick says, well, I have an idea. He wrote me about my mama. And he pulls out the letter that he had in the book. And Uncle George's face becomes very pensive and, stiff and concerned. His whole demeanor changes as he gets up to walk to a bookshelf. His back is to Tick, so Tick doesn't see this change in his uncle when referencing the letter that his father wrote to him. But when he explains that the letter is about his mom, but it's about her heritage and where her people come from, he kind of relaxes and says, I thought he'd given up on, trying to find out about her people. And two questions immediately come to mind for me the first time I saw it. Of course, now I have answers, but the first time I saw it, the questions that immediately came to mind is, why did he stiffen up that way at the mention of Tick's mother? And two, why was Tick's father so interested in his wife's, the mother of Tick's, heritage? Those two things don't go together. Most people are interested in their own heritage and finding their own genealogies, but for him to be so concerned with hers, especially when we later learn in this same conversation that she was not. It was not, a necessity for her to find out where she came from, but for her husband, apparently, it was. And we find that out when Tick reads the letter and he says, I know, his father says to him in the letter, I know that like your mother, this is not as important to you, but I figured that I would look into it. This is something that we should look into. And when doing so, found that you have a secret heritage that you should know more about. So you should come home and go with me to this place, Arkham. When discussing that Montrose, Tick's father, and George's brother, has written this letter about the ancestry of his wife and a secret birthright that has been kept from Atticus, we learn that Atticus, his mother, has passed. And Uncle George says, I thought he gave up tracing your mother's ancestry when she passed away. And he goes on to read the letter saying that they have to go to Arkham. And Uncle George says Arkham is not a real place. It was based on the Salem witch trials in Salem, Massachusetts. But it was created by H.P. Lovecraft for his stories. It's not a real place. And he takes the letter to look at it. And he says that it doesn't say Arkham. It says Artem with a D. Now, as we go back to what I just said, when Tick picked up the H.P. Lovecraft book, it said Arkham Publishing on the side, on the spine. And this letter he's received from his father says, come home and go with me to Arkham. And when Uncle George looks at the letter and sees that it's, in fact, a D and not a K, and it's Artem, Tick says, Pop was such a stickler for education, you would think he would know how to write better. That will come into play later. So remember what I said. Later on, Tick leaves OK Repairs and Keys and Earl's Garage. Like I said, I'm watching now as I do it. That way I don't have to actually write and take notes, which is how I usually do it. And like I said, there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes on in that building, in the storefront, under the apartment of George and Hippolyta and D. It's called OK Repairs, Keys While You Wait, and Earl's Garage and Motor and Tune-Up. So all that's in one store. I mean, it's a one-stop shop for me. So, get your shoes repaired while you get some new keys to your car, and you get your oil changed and get your car fixed. Can't beat it. So, like I said, everybody's still out there. They got the big barrel grills. They barbecuing and everything, getting ready for the block party that starts at 12 and goes all night long. We used to have those when I was a kid. Not so much anymore. I feel like kids from today really miss out. And I'm sure people in this era thought ours were not as dope as theirs, but I disagree. So as Tick is walking, he's walking underneath the subway, and Tierra Wax Clones is playing. Like I said, soundtrack is a character of its own, and Clones is going to come into play a little later on. Just remember I said it. That's the best I can tell you. That's going to be my new tagline from now on. Remember I said it. Okay, so as Tick is walking, you just see the goings on in the neighborhood, and he walks by a recruiter who's saying, "Join the army for home and country." And he stops and he pauses and he listens a little bit to what the guy is saying before he walks on, and don't really know what that is like, does he disagree now that he served in the military about what they're doing and what's going on? Does he think that recruiting these kids is a bad idea? Don't really know. It kind of was like, what's that about? But I haven't gotten an answer yet. He walks into Denmark Vesey's bar and asks for the owner, and he's confronted by the club bouncer. Okay, now like I said, this show drops Easter eggs, and it's an education. This is something that was not known to me until someone in the fan group mentioned it. And so that I don't mess up, I have notes here that I'm going to read. So if you see me looking back and forth, that's because I'm reading. Denmark Vesey or Vesey, not really sure how that's pronounced because my Google Assistant is British in honor of my little cousin Jordan Moody, who lost her life to cancer, who was also British. So Denmark Vesey was an African-American leader in Charleston, South Carolina. He was born in 1767 in St. Thomas, Virgin Islands. He died on July 2nd, 1822 in Charleston, South Carolina. And there is a book about his life and this incident that he's famous for, which is the trial record of Denmark Vesey or Denmark Vesey. And what happened apparently is that in June of 1822, he was accused and convicted of being a leader of something called the Rising, which was supposed to be this grand slave revolt that was going to take place on July 14th. He was executed on July 2nd to avoid this great uprising. And so if you want to know more about that, gentlemen, you can read the book, The Trial Record of Denmark Vesey. When Tick confronts or is confronted by the bouncer at Denmark Vesey's bar, he's told the bar is closing early for the block party, and he tries to proceed past the guy who's the bouncer. And he was like, "Hey, man, the bar is closing early." And then he's like, "Oh, shit, Tick, is that you? Blah, blah, blah." It's like, "It's me, Tree." And Tick kind of dismisses him like, "Yeah, I know who you are." So I don't know if there's some backstory there between the two of them. But it wasn't like he was, overtly glad to see this guy that he apparently, grew up with or went to school with or whatever. It's kind of just brushed him off like, "Yeah, I know who you are. Is the owner here?" And he says, "The guy with the earrings." And I guess guys with earrings in the 50s was a big deal because he mentioned it. Like now, the guy with the earrings, that could be anybody. Well, I guess not in 1955. So he asked for the guy with the earrings. And Tick says, "Oh, yeah, Sammy, he in the back." And he has this sly smile on his face. So when Tick goes out back, Sammy is out in the alley getting head from a guy. And Tick's like, "Oh shit," turns around and walks away. The guy who's servicing Sammy jumps up and runs off. Sammy buttons up, gets his shit together, turns around and starts talking to Tick. And he says, "You're Montrose's boy. I remember you from pulling him off, a bar stool in my bar a couple of times. And he hasn't been perched on one in about 2 weeks now." And he goes on to describe that he left with a white man who looked to be a lawyer and not a police officer because the way he was dressed and the car that he was driving are not something that a police could afford. At this time, Okay, we already know Sammy's gay because, he's the dude with the earrings getting hit in the back by some guy. But his voice is not feminine or gives you that homosexual male feel. It does not. That changes later. I don't know why. Now, the bouncer Tree, he's gonna, play a role throughout the story, as well as the Denmark Vesey's club owner, Sammy. Now, Tree is portrayed by Duran J. Powell. I've only ever seen Duran in one other thing, and that is Chicago Med. And in Chicago Med, he is like this great stand-up dude with long dreads. Now he's got like a regular haircut and whatever. But you're rooting for him in Chicago Med. In Lovecraft Country, he is number one on my ain't shit list, because Tree ain't shit, I'm telling you. The character Sammy, who owns the bar, is played by John Hudson Odom. And Sammy's character is going to play a significant part in the unveiling of characters. And I say unveiling because right now, all of them are surface, but it's episode 1. As the layers get peeled away, things are unveiled. And so Sammy is going to play an intricate part in the unveiling of a character and that character's past, and better help to explain the current characteristics of that character based on past experiences. Next scene, it's nighttime. The block party is crowded. There's live music. We hear a lady singing a bluesy rock tune, I Want a Tall Skinny Papa. And we see this beautiful brown-skinned lady. And colorism is a thing in the African American community. So it's important that, we acknowledge all shades of our wonderful race. And this sister happens to be dark skinned, beautiful. And she's wearing this beautiful blue, like, sateen dress, She's playing a guitar on stage with a full band. And I don't know if that was like a big thing in the 50s, because, I don't know much about the 50s. But I think it would be, because a woman leading a band and playing the guitar while singing, while it wasn't something uncommon, because we can do anything, I just think it was cool to see her fronting the band, because the band is all male. She's the only female on the stage. And we find out that is Ruby Baptiste, and Ruby Baptiste is played by Wunmi Mosaku. And I had never heard of Wunmi Mosaku before seeing Lovecraft Country. And then I found that she was in Luther and Fathers and Sons and a lot of other things that I'm currently trying to watch. Now, I used to watch Luther back in the day before she was on it. And it's great because, first of all, Idris Elba is Idris Elba, and he's gorgeous and talented, and why would you not want to watch him? But the antagonist in the first season really had me keeping on, because she was absolutely batshit crazy, but didn't know it. So if you haven't already, you may want to binge Luther. And I'm going to have to finish it now, because I want to get to where Wunmi joins the cast and see how she does there. Because in Father and Sons, I don't like her. I haven't finished binging it, but for right now, she's on an ain't shit list, if there were one for that show. On this show, she's not on that list. So she plays Ruby Baptiste. She sings. I think she cleans houses. And we learn in this scene, as a cab pulls up and the police are out there directing traffic for the block party and whatever, the kids have reopened, or they have not. The kids had opened the fire hydrant earlier in the day. When Tick was walking to Denmark Vesey's bar, we seen a police officer telling the kids no and cutting the fire hydrant off. So everybody's out dancing. It's a summer night. It's hot. They got their good clothes on because it's the black party and everybody's showing up and showing out. And we learn when the cab pulls up that the beautiful Jurnee Smollett gets out of the car and she has a camera and she's wearing like really hip 1950s clothing, really hip. And she walks around to the side of the stage and she stands there. And after Ruby finishes this song, she says, I think we have time for one more. What do you want to hear? And she was like, I know y'all don't want to hear none of that lily white shit. We want to rock. So Leti, who's standing on the side of the stage, and that's Jurnee Smollett's character, Letitia fucking Lewis, I'll explain later, who goes by the name Leti. And she's standing on the side of the stage and she says, whole lot of shaking. And someone in the band says, is that Leti? Ruby, that's your sister. And Ruby snidely remarks, thanks, I have eyes. And so we automatically get the feel that there is a little tension between the sisters. And Ruby makes a comment after she says that she's going to go ahead and sing Whole Lot of Shaking, that the crowd starts chanting. After someone yells, Leti, get up there and sing with your sister, the crowd starts chanting for Leti to get up and sing. And Ruby says, I'm sure my sister is tired after returning from wherever she's been, and she doesn't, want to get up and sing. So again, it leads you on to know that there is some tension and conflict between them. So Leti eventually acquiesces to the crowd and gets up on stage, and there's, a little control for the mic, and, the looks that they give each other, which again, lets you know that there is tension between them. By the end of the song, they have gone into this routine and dance routine, and they're happy and smiling and enjoying themselves. But that does not erase the tension, which soon emerges as soon as they walk off the stage, when Ruby comments to Leti, with a dress that short, you should be wearing stockings. And Leti says, it's too hot for that. And she said, you can't even afford stockings? To which Leti replies, what makes you think I can't afford any? It's just too hot for that. And she was like, I know you ain't got no money. I know that's why you're here. I know you came for a handout. And Leti refutes that and says, no, I did not come for a handout. I just need a place to stay. And Ruby, my favorite line from that this scene is, there it is. This is like, that there it is like, I knew the moment I saw you, you came for something. You did not just come home to come home. You did not just come home to see me. You came because you needed something. And that seems to be the dynamic of this sisterhood. Favorite line is after she explains that she doesn't need money, she just needs a place to stay. Ruby tells her, you got 2 nights. It's like, 2 nights. How am I supposed to find a job in 2 days? And she says, you can go up on the north side and get a job just like that. And she was like, I'm not cleaning houses. And she was like, oh, you think, you're too good to clean houses? It was like, I'm not doing that. So you're going to go down to a department store and get a job? She was like, yeah, I can do that. And she said, you don't think I've been trying to do that? And she was like, well, if I get it, then I can make enough money for both of us, and we could have our own rooms for once. And Ruby's like, I'm fine where I am. And she's like, we can have our own house. Black folks are pioneering into white communities all the time now. And Ruby makes the comment, well, why don't you go and ask one of them to put you up? Or better yet, go to Marvin's. And then we find out that Marvin is their brother. And I think the way that this works, which is different than the novel, is that all 3 of these children share a mother and they all have different fathers, because later on, Ruby makes it known that Leti is her half-sister. But we know that they share a mom, because when she tells Leti where she's staying at this boarding house, she was like, oh, that place is shit. And she was like, what happened to, the nice room that you had? And she said, Mama's funeral happened. And she said, I'm not saying that to make nothing of it. I'm just telling you, what it is. Facts is facts. And then we learned that Leti did not return for her mother's funeral, which is a sore spot between the siblings as well. So But that 2 nights did me in. You got 2 nights. And you ain't getting none of these tips just because you got up there and sang with me. So, you need to figure out some stuff. So after Ruby and Leti finish their song and they've had their conversation about Leti being able to spend 2 nights, Tick shows up at the block party and greets his family. And then he proceeds to reopen the fire hydrant. So everybody's out dancing and enjoying themselves at the block party and now dancing in the water because Tick has set the fire hydrant open. And he takes his shirt off. And let me just say that Jonathan Majors, without a shirt, is a thing of beauty. That man has a body that looked like God just sat down one day and chiseled it by hand. He is gorgeous. And Leti notices and is like, ooh, who's that? So a lot of people say that, it started here and now we're here because that's a thing going around social media right now. When later on, when Tick sees Leti. But I disagree. I think it happened right here when she sees him. Because the expression is one of female appreciation at this gorgeous man with no shirt on. And as y'all can see, my hair is growing and it annoys me when it touches me. Sorry, so that's what all this is about. I'm actually tickled that it can now touch me, but at the same time, it feels like stuff's crawling on me. Have to get used to having hair again. But I digress. So she says, that's Tick, after Ruby tells her who it is, like little skinny Coke bottle glasses Tick. And Ruby makes the comment, said, yeah, he grew up. Can't say the same for you. So again, there is that sisterly conflict. So it's like, to me now, I'm thinking Ruby's the older sister. Leti's the baby. I think Marvin is the oldest brother and the older of the 3 siblings. That's just nobody's confirmed any of this. This is just my opinion. But Ruby is the one who has to take care of her sister who's never grown up, who always has to bail her out. That's what I'm getting from the dynamics of the conversation that they've had since she's seen Ruby, since she's seen that Leti is back home this 10 minutes. In this, 10-minute frame, you get that from them, that there is a lot of unresolved issues concerning their mother and between the sisters, and that Leti is the carefree, childish one, while Ruby had to be the responsible grown-up. In this scene, we also learn that Leti is an artistic. She's a photographer. And so she kind of captures everything in her world travels. And we'll later learn what those world travels are. Because we know that Ruby makes the comment, my sister has returned from wherever it is she's been, but we don't know yet where she's been. Apparently, Jordan Peele has a thing with colors and their meanings in his films. As I've said, I've never seen one, so I don't know, but for Jordan Peele fans out there, I'm sure you guys do. It has been speculated in fan groups and on Twitter why Ruby wears red. Not Ruby, I'm sorry. Why Leti wears red. She has the killer red fingernails. She usually has on some form of red or burgundy in her wardrobe. So at her introduction, she has on a sleeveless red blouse and a jean skirt, which Ruby says is too short not to have on stockings. And I'm like, it's knee length. That's not short at all. But it's the 50s, modes of decorum were different at that point. And in the skirt, there are red accents in her skirt. And throughout the episode, we will see her in different variations of red somewhere in her wardrobe. Which, let's just say, costumes by Dana Pink. I swear she needs to win an Emmy for costumes. If she's not nominated, it's a conspiracy. And if she don't win, I'm thinking something funny is going on, because these costumes, I mean, period pieces always get me, because in period pieces you have to go back. You don't always have the materials and the things that they had back then, because they had, you know, different ways of making colors than we do now and things like that. So to make that stuff look authentic 1955 in 2018 or 17 or whenever they did this is amazing. And Dana Pink is killing, because let me tell you, Jurnee Smollett's wardrobe as Letitia Lewis, right there, baby. All aces. All aces. During the conversation where Ruby's let Leti know she has 2 nights, so she needs to find a job, and she talks about going down to the department store. Ruby says that she'd been trying for years. I think it's also very important that we talk about that, you know, colorism within the African American community, because Ruby's dark skin and of course Leti is light. So Leti may have a better chance of going to a department store and getting a job than Ruby would in 1955 outside Chicago. Okay, I think it's important to say here that Dee's drawing skills also help George on his guide trips. From the stories that he comes home and tells, she draws what they can find on the atlas that they carry in the car, which is a station wagon named Woody, that Uncle George is sure will outlast the entire family. So when Tick says that, you know, he's going to go and find his dad, he needed to know where the place was, where Ardham, Massachusetts was. And Uncle George tells him that the last mention of it was probably 2 centuries ago on a census, and it puts it somewhere near Devon County. So they would go and do a guide trip, because he was going to go with him. And Tick's like, Uncle George, with those knees, I don't know. And at the beginning of that scene, we see Uncle George icing his knees, and he has a really nasty scar. And we find out that he was somewhere in Anna, wherever that is, and he was attacked. And both of his kneecaps were shattered. And he reiterates how dangerous it would be for Hippolyta to go out on a guide trip alone, because if he says those crackers had caught her instead of me, I can't imagine what they would have done to her. And so after he's saying, you know, it'd be a good addition to the guidebook for them to go and check out Devon County, Massachusetts, while they're looking for Montrose, Tick says, I wouldn't be so sure of that. And he shows what Diana has drawn on the atlas in that area, and it's the Grim Reaper. Next scene, we see that Tick has gone home to his father's apartment, and he comes in and he puts on a jazz record. And then you see this wall, their collection. Montrose has like a gazillion records on his wall. I would love to know what's actually in those records, which records he has. But Tick puts on a jazz record, and then he sees that right there on the table next to the record player is a copy of The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas, which is apparently his father's favorite book. And there's a picture there of him, his father, and his mother when he was a boy. And then he goes into his bedroom, and the room is red and the walls are red. And I know that red is usually a sign of anger or violence. And in this room with these red walls, there are holes in the wall. And we'll talk about that later. But just remember that I said it. Then Tick sits down on the bed, and he has a copy of The Count of Monte Cristo. And it looks like a different copy than the one he had in the living room. Now, it could just be that the back looks different than the front cover. And when he was looking at it initially, it was the front cover. And when he sits it down on the bed, it's the back. And that could be the reason for it. Or because it's Montrose's favorite book, there could be more than one copy in the house. And then he picks up the phone to make a telephone call. And when the operator asks where to direct a call, he gives a very long 555 number. Because we know 555 is the Hollywood area code for television and movies. And and everybody's area code is 555. I don't care where you live. And he gives this long number. And so when he's finished with the telephone number, the lady says South Korea. He says yes. She places the call. Someone answers in Korean, and he doesn't say anything. He just gets pensive and stiff and obviously uncomfortable, but he doesn't say anything. And then the voice on the line says, Tick, Tick, is that you? He still doesn't say anything, but he's getting more and more apprehensive about being on the phone call, which has me like, what the hell you call for if you weren't going to talk to her? And then the voice on the line says, you went home. I told you not to. And he just hurriedly hangs the phone up. And I'm like, okay, that ain't make no sense. Just remember I said it, because it'll come back. Everything in this series comes back and is intertwined into 20 other things that you will not, I repeat, you will not catch the first time around. And I'm talking brainiacs to the average Joe. You're not going to catch it. You got to watch it more than once. You got to dissect this thing. You really do. So, next scene, enter, he's going to meet Uncle George. So I'm assuming that he stayed at his dad's place. And he's going to Uncle George's house, and they're getting ready to head out to Devon County, Massachusetts. And when he rounds the corner, he sees the lower half of a female loading Woody, Uncle George's car. And he gives that appreciative male look, just like, Leti gave to him when he was running around in the fire hydrant with no shirt on. And he calls her name and he says, Leti Lewis. And she says, only my friends get to call me that. And she says, are we still friends, Tick? And he says, well, considering you were the only female member of the Southside Futuristic Science Club. Yeah. And she gives him a hug and says, yes, I wasn't I? Now, this differs from the novel. Not so much that it differs, but it doesn't actually address it. But in the novel, she was the only female member of the Southside Futuristic Science Club. And her mother made her stop going. She wasn't allowed to be a part of it. I don't know if it was because of her mother's religious reasons, or because she was a girl hanging out with all these boys, or what they were doing in the science club. I can't remember. It is addressed in the novel as to why she was not allowed to continue to be a part of that group. But another thing that lets us in on is that Atticus and Letitia were friends as children, and that they have common interests. Hence the Futuristic Scientific Club of the Southside. After she hugs him, she says, I heard you were down in Florida hiding out. And he said, yeah. She said, how was it? He said, segregated. And I don't know if it was a writer or someone on the show, Misha Green or someone, but they said, that kind of explained how things were in the South. But at that time, lots of things were segregated, not just the South. And so maybe that may not have been the right word to use there, but it gave the viewing audience an understanding, because when you say segregated, that means more than just being separated. And in this country, everybody knows that not just black folk, white and black, understand the implications of what being segregated means. Because being segregated in this country means that you are segregated by invisible class lines created in the minds of the oppressor. And these unrealistic boundaries, these unrealistic imaginary boundaries that only exist in the head of the oppressor, the colonizer, but is being imposed on others. So in your mind, you're better than me because your skin is different than me. So you can put me in a place and I have to stay there. And unfortunately, the laws in this country allowed for that way of thinking. And at this point, I guess that we can also assume that Leti's 2 nights are up at Ruby's, because Uncle George comes out and says, are you guys ready? And Tick looks at Leti and was like, wait, are you coming with us? And Uncle George says part way because Marvin is working for the register, I think it is, and is going to help them get some information on the area of Devon County that they have to go to. So they're going to stop at Marvin's and drop Leti off at Marvin, who is the brother. And as I said before, I think that Marvin is the oldest of the three, but he lives with his father. He only spent summers with them and their mother in the south side of Chicago. And as I said, also, all three of them have different fathers, I think. Has not been confirmed, but that's the way I'm thinking it shaken down. Unless Marvin and Ruby have the same father, but Marvin lived with his dad after his parents split or whatever because he was a boy and Ruby was left with her mother because she was a girl. Because apparently that happens a lot. I have found when parents split and they split custody, a lot of times it goes that way. Girls go with mom, boys go with dad. So that could be it. I don't know. Hasn't been addressed. This is just me inferring from what I've read and what I've saw. Marvin's working not for the Register, but for the Springfield African American in Springfield, Massachusetts. Then we see Hippolyta and Dee come out and complete the travel checklist. And apparently the travel checklist, this is something that they do by routine. And so they come out and they go over everything that has to be in the car. And I was like, it was interesting the things that they had to have in the car. Because you have the routine, the regular roadside kit, flares and things like that, spare tire and jack. Make sure you have those things because, anything can happen in a vehicle where you have to pull off to the side of the road and do some minor repairs or whatever. The thing that really struck me was mattress, or the sleeping matter mattress and blankets. And the realization came to me that they had to have that because they were going to be traveling and there weren't going to be many hotels and motels that welcomed them because of the color of their skin. And it's depressing to think that the ancestors had to go through that and so much worse. Because I was born in 1980. Like I said earlier, I'm 40 years old. These are not things I've ever had to witness. And I live in Maryland. I live in Talbot County, Maryland, home of Frederick Douglass. I live about 15 miles from Dorchester County, Maryland, home of Harriet Tubman. So just knowing their stories, you can imagine the area I live in. And I mean, I know great people of every race, color, hue, gender, and sexual preference. But I don't ever take lightly or allow myself to forget where I live and where I come from. Born in Virginia, raised here in Maryland. And while we are considered the South because we're below the Mason-Dixon line, the real South does not consider us the South. And a lot of us do not consider ourselves the South. And when you think slavery, you think deep South, you think Alabama, Florida, Georgia, that type of thing. And it was everywhere because these people are in Chicago, they're going up north to Massachusetts. And they have some things waiting for them when they get to Massachusetts. So don't think it was just in the deep South because it was not. And we find out that this is a routine because they have a checklist, first of all. And secondly, after they're done going over the checklist, they go, hey, something's missing. And Hippolyta and George play out this little scene. And Dee's like, do you have to do this every time? And they're waiting for Dee's travel comics. So she writes comics and she draws and colors. And I'll look and I'll tell you in a second who's actually doing all the drawings because they are absolutely magnificent. And like everything, there is nothing in this show, nothing that does not serve the story. So you got to pay attention to detail. You really do. So if you're a person who watches TV but doesn't watch TV, no, you have to watch. You have to listen. And more importantly than anything, you have to be open because they're going to hit some stuff that you're not expecting. And some things that for some viewers may be hard to believe or not easy to swallow. And they're not shying away, they're not sugarcoating, and they're giving it to you full throttle. And everything in this show has a purpose and serves the story. So Dee has written a travel comic, and Uncle George says he's excited to see the new travel comic because he wants to know what happens to Panther Man. And as he opens it up, his expression is kind of like, and he shows it to Hippolyta, and we then learn that it's not another adventure in her Panther Man stories, but she started a new one. And that's what we saw her drawing the morning her parents were making love in the bedroom, while she was drawing in the living room with her mother as a reference. See, like I said, remember I said it. And the new character is Orinthia Blue. Now, I don't know anything about Orinthia Blue, and I know very little about this except for what I've seen in the movies, but Hippolyta is, I think, a Greek goddess. I think. Not sure. But she's the mother of Wonder Woman, whose name is Diana. That much I do know. So she's an Amazon queen. And in the book, George and Hippolyta have a son named Horace who does all these drawings. I think it was a conscious decision. Well, I know it was a conscious decision because they did it for the writers and show creators to make Horace female named Diana, and to play off of the Hippolyta Diana relationship of mother and daughter, and warrior queen and warrior princess, and all of that's going to come into play later. So remember I said it. I swear I might get a t-shirt that says that. T's Corner, remember I said it. Another thing that I took note of later after rewatching episodes was that when they were headed out after they discussed the Orinthia Blue comic, Dee said, the comic was no big deal to her mother. And then she says to her father, "I'll see you when you get back, Pop." And he says, "Yes, you will." I'm not even going to say it. You know what I'm thinking. And I want to take the time, while I'm not saying that, to apologize for the length of this video, because I know in this era of immediacy, nobody wants to watch a long video, and I'm 30 minutes into telling you about the show, and it's taken me 57 minutes. So needless to say, this is going to be a long video. You guys know I'm a talker. I'm going to learn how to unpack and condense. I am. Maybe for episode 2, I'm going to condense, because 57 minutes, I don't even like to watch videos that long. It's like a whole show. But like I said, this thing is so serious, you have to take it piece by piece and work your way through it, because you'll miss something. You'll either miss something that was key, and then when it pops back up, you're like, wait a minute, didn't they mention something about that 3 episodes back? Or this amazing rich history of ours that they are spoon feeding us. If you don't know, you don't know. And I think it's the next episode, if not the next episode, episode 3, where I learned some things I did not know, and more importantly, I did not know that I did not know them. So I didn't catch them. When the Easter eggs were dropped, it completely was over my head because I didn't know. And thank God for the Facebook fan groups and Twitter and the show creators and those who are working on the show who, they give you insight because they understand they know what they're doing. So they give you insight for those of us who don't know, so that we can all be in the know. As they begin their journey from Chicago, they're in the Midwest, and they're at an ice cream parlor. And you have the white section in the front, the colored section off to the side. It's very important to notice the visual aids that they're giving here. Again, the color red is present because there's a little colored girl. And I say colored only because that's on the sign and I'm reading it. I've never referred to us as that outside of periodic things. The sign, the colored sign, has a red arrow pointing the direction, and there's a little girl standing there with, we're going to assume, her brother and her father, and she's wearing red shorts. There's some kids. You see Tick and Uncle George sitting at a picnic table. There's some kids beside them, and one of the kids is riding a red bicycle. And another thing to really notice is that there are several people in front of the White's ice cream parlor counter. They all look to have already been served, and the staff is just chewing the fat with them while the black family is being ignored while waiting to order. And this is going through the Midwest. And my family lives in the Midwest in Oklahoma. You should research the history of that place if you don't know. And James Baldwin is speaking, and I don't know, when it was or from what, series of talks it was from. The man is brilliant. He said lots of great and brilliant things. And he's talking about the American dream and how that pertains to African Americans in this country. And that's playing while we see them traveling and dealing with racism and segregation and those with a superior mindset. I won't say those who are superior because they aren't, but they have this mindset that they are. And we see how, that starts to affect our main characters on their journey because at a gas station, Tick's standing there eating a banana while Leti's fooling with her camera, and there are some white teenagers a little ways off, and one of the males starts making monkey sounds and gestures at Tick, who's eating a banana, and approaches him. And at this point, Tick's ready to rock some heads, and Leti has to kind of cool him down.
I go on with some other things you had to say. The other deeper element of a certain awkwardness I feel has to do with one's point of view. I have to put it that way. One's sense, one's system of reality. It would seem to me the proposition before the House, when I put it that way, is the American dream at the expense of the American Negro, or the American dream is at the expense of the American Negro, is a question, it is voted, and that one's response to that question, one's reaction to that question, has to depend on the effect on where you find yourself in the world, what your sense of reality is, what your system of reality is. That is, it depends on assumptions which we hold so deeply as to be scarcely aware of them. A white South African, or a Mississippi sharecropper, or a Mississippi sheriff, or a Frenchman driven out of Algeria, all have
Tell me I was not just talking all that time and not talking to anyone. I thought I was talking to y'all. Ah, wow. I was saying, I gotta go back over all of this. Stop it. I was saying that throughout the trek, there is a level of intimacy that develops between the characters, Atticus, Letitia, and George. And we see that when they come out of a colored only theater. It's either a theater or a diner, I'm not sure. And the sign says colored only. There's a mother and daughter there standing in front of it. And I found, I don't know if it was through the show's creators or just a fellow fan, that was a picture from history. And the imagery in this show is just amazing. There are lots of things from history that are recreated for the show. And I was saying that, and if this is repeat, I apologize, but I can't tell. I just know that my camera was on pause when it shouldn't have been. There's a lady standing outside of the grocery store selling flowers, and she has flowers in one hand and a baby in the other. And she's not looking her best. She's not wearing her Sunday best. She's looking like the struggle is real. And she had to bring her kid to work in order to make this money to support this kid. And so there's a lot that could be inferred and just dug from seeing that lady standing there selling flowers. And Tick goes over and buys flowers. And I took note that in this portion of the journey, all three of them are riding on the front seat of the station wagon, Woody. And in a station wagon, and I know some of you younger people may not know what that is, but in a station wagon, there is plenty of room. So for three people to be riding in a station wagon, they absolutely do not have to be sitting on the front seat together unless they want to. And I just felt that that signified a bond developing and forming between Atticus and Letitia and George. And at this time, Letitia has fallen asleep on Tick's arm, on his shoulder. And you see that the flowers that he bought from the lady in front of the grocery store earlier, one of them is now tucked in her hair. And I just thought that was a really sweet gesture that he bought the flowers for her. And I also thought it was telling of the level of intimacy that was developing in their bond, because as women, we learn that not all men are honorable and trustworthy. So you have to always have your guard up. And so to have your guard down enough to go to sleep with these two men tells that she feels they are trustworthy and honorable enough for her to relax. Because as a woman, I've learned you don't just sleep around anybody, because unfortunately, sometimes bad things can happen. And so for her to be comfortable enough to fall asleep in the midst of these two men, and for her to think them honorable enough and trustworthy enough for her to do that, and then for them to prove to be honorable enough and trustworthy enough for her to do that, was great. But I felt like just her sleeping on Tick's shoulder, that was like a big deal for me. It was like, oh, things are changing. You can see that. That's like the visible, tangible expression of the level of comfort and intimacy developing between the two of them. And another thing that I thought was weird was, I guess, the realization of both Tick and Uncle George that she was that comfortable, because they both looked at her. It's like they're riding along. Uncle George is driving. Tick is reading something, which I don't understand because it's dark outside. But he's looking at something, or he's reading something, and he looks down with a kind of puzzled expression on his face that she's laying on his shoulder asleep. And then when he turns his head back forward, Uncle George kind of does the same thing, like, hey, she knocked out. And then we cut to them the next day, and Letitia's sitting on the hood of the car. Uncle George is doing something. Atticus is a little further away from them, kind of doing a wash up or a wrench off. Those of you who know. And I told you already that this man has the body of an Adonis, and his back is chiseled and gorgeous, and yes. And so Leti's sitting on the car, and the red isn't prominent this time in this scene. It's not prominent, but she has red fingernails, and she's sitting on the car applying red lipstick. When Uncle George says he has a tip on this diner called Lydia's in Simmonsville, so maybe they should go there. And Tick reminds him of what this area will be populated on Dee's Atlas. So it doesn't seem like, this is the type of place that African Americans would be welcome, because he makes that statement. And Letitia said, I know that y'all didn't ask y'all didn't ask my opinion, but I could do with a hot meal. And Uncle George says, you heard the girl. And Leti responds with, since this girl is not allowed to drive, I'm picking the radio station. And Tick said that the area on Dee's Atlas would be populated with trolls that would be looking to pick their teeth with unsuspecting motorists. And at this time, while they're having this conversation, and Tick is still wiping off and everything, Leti's sitting on the car taking pictures of him. And you never did see them. I mean, she had them strung up in the dark room later on, but you never did see them. And I would love to see them, because like I said, this man is gorgeous. I want to see what the camera saw, because that's always a different view. I'm a novice photog, and I know things look different from the naked eye and through the camera. So I would be interested to see what that gorgeous man looks like through the lens of that camera. Throughout their travels, Uncle George commonly refers to Leti not by her name, but as girl. And so they're riding along and she turns up the radio and they're listening to B.B. King, You Obsess Me, which is talking about, a beautiful woman who's getting under his skin. And I think for me personally, that's kind of dealing with the dynamics of the relationship between Tick and Leti that is changing. As they arrive in Simmonsville and they're using the directions that they got from someone else who apparently is helping out with the guide, who given the restaurant Lydia's a good review as a place that was friendly for African Americans to stop. They are looking for it and it's not the color that they're expecting it to be. It's supposed to be a brick and now they see white, and the name of it was Lydia's Diner and now it says Simmonsville Dinette. And so he was like, well, this is where it's supposed to be, so we're here, so we might as well go in and check. And both Tick and Lydia are... Lydia? Where did I get that? Lydia is the name of the place. Both Tick and Leti are kind of skeptical and eerie. Like, I'm not sure we're supposed to be in this place. Because when they pulled into Simmonsville, in front of the fire department, there was the Good Old Boys Club and their very angry and mean dog. And there's women walking down the street as they're walking down who are giving them, the side eye. And Tick says, about being refused service, and we're discussing if the restaurant was actually Lydia's because it was Simmonsville Dinette and it was a different color, and Uncle George was saying it's in the right place. He said, don't judge a book by its cover. And Tick said, a book can't refuse you service. And Leti came back with, or spit in your water glass. And at this point, she's wearing a white midriff collared button-down sleeveless shirt with some blue shorts and the notorious white batwing glasses that have become the signature Letty Lewis look, and also her her emoticon or whatever you call that on Twitter. So that, for those of you who follow the show and follow it on Twitter, if you do hashtag Letty Lewis, it comes up with her little cartoon. When they walk into the Simmonsville Dinette, there's one patron and a waiter there. And the patron and the waiter are both shocked and stunned to silence to see these three African Americans walk into the restaurant. Uncle George, says, we were just driving by, I thought we'd stop in for lunch. Nobody says anything. After a few moments, he says, okay, we'll just seat ourselves. Again, nobody says anything. The patron gets up, grabs his hat and coat, and he walks out, but he's watching them the whole time, like, shocked. And Uncle George is, acting like nothing's wrong. Hey, what's good here? They sit at the table, and the waiter comes over and brings them menus, and Tick asks for coffees. The kid is just standing. He doesn't know what to do. I felt so sorry for this kid, the waiter, because he was between a rock and a hard place for certain. He may not have agreed with the tactics of the town folk, but he likes his life. So, we have to take those things into consideration. And so they asked for 3 coffees, and he goes to the back, I guess, under the guise of getting the coffees. And Leti says, looks like the Simmonsville Dinette will not be making the guide, which means that it's not a place welcoming to African Americans. And Uncle George says, well, we're here now, so, we're here. And Tick says, doesn't mean we have to stay. And Uncle George makes a great point. We have every right to be here. We're citizens. And you're a veteran, for God's sake. They shouldn't turn us down for service. And while the kid's in the back, Leti excuses herself to go to the ladies' room. And on her return from the ladies' room, she overhears the kid on the telephone talking to someone and says, it's 3 of them. They just come in and sit down. And then the kid says in like exasperated tone, no, I didn't serve them because not after what you did to Miss Lydia. So we don't know what happened to Miss Lydia, but something bad happened to Miss Lydia to have this kid this shook. And so while Letty's in the restroom, Uncle George and Tick are sitting at the table, and Tick's just, attention to detail, soldier thing. And he's watching and he's looking around and he feels, uncomfortable, but he's decided he's going to have some biscuits and gravy because that smelled good when they walked in. And then as he's looking around, he's noticing some stuff off and he says, Uncle George, remind me why the White House is white. Now, I've heard this, before. I didn't know how it all went down. I didn't know when it was. I just knew it had been burned and repainted. But apparently, during the War of 1812, which Uncle George goes on to tell Tick, um, the executive branch was burned. And when the slaves rebuilt it, they had to paint it white to hide the burn marks. And as he gets to the part where he says hide the burn marks, Tick moves a tile on the floor with his foot. And underneath, you could see scorched and charred burns. And then, my absolute favorite part of this episode is when Letitia realizes they're in trouble. And before we get into how Leti let Tick and Uncle George know that they were in trouble, let me also say that even though the diner was supposed to be a red brick building and now it's white, inside is red and white. So while Leti is not wearing her signature red except for on her fingernails and her lips because she's wearing a blue and white ensemble that's gorgeous. Thank you, Dana. The booths and the benches and the floor tiles in Simmonsville Dinette are red and white, which in this case signal danger and violence. So simultaneously as Uncle George is finishing the reason for why the White House is white, and Tick kicks that floor tile and sees that, there are burn marks underneath, you hear Leti's heels clicking at a high rate of speed down the hall. And she yells to them, didn't break stride at all, from the manager's office door where she overheard the conversation of the waiter and whoever he was talking to on the phone outside to Woody. Did not break stride at all. Full speed, straight through. Y'all get y'all asses up. We got to get the fuck out of here now. And while she's saying it, you hear a fire truck siren. And so they grab their things and run. And my son's favorite part is that while they're running out, Uncle George is grabbing some mints out of the tray on the table. So as Uncle George and Tick run out to the car that Leti has jumped into Woody and drove the car up to the door to pick them up, Uncle George hollers, girl, let me drive. And she's like, get your ass in this car. And they pull off. And so it's a high-speed chase. The fire truck and the good old boys in a pickup are chasing them down and shooting at them. So Leti's doing some Mario Andretti through the town of Simmonsville, trying to get away from these people. Meanwhile, they've shot in the back window out of Woody and shot the car up a little bit. And when Tick had gone to Montrose's house the night that he called Korea, he also got a gun out of a shoebox in the closet. And so he has that gun in his duffel. And he pulls that out and starts shooting back. The fire truck got sidelined because they went down a back alley that the fire truck could not fit in, but they still have the good old boys in the pickup truck on their tail. So Uncle George is pretty much passenger side driving and irritating Leti as she's trying to get away. And he's like, keep it steady or the car's going to spin out. And she's like, I'm being shot at. How are we supposed to keep it steady? And so they're going on. And he's like, girl, be careful. God, what did he say? Like, be careful or Woody's going to spin out or flip or something. And she yells while driving. And this is a legendary line that will go down in history. My name is not girl, it's Letitia fucking Lewis. And so that becomes a thing. So as they're continuing their high-speed chase with the good old boys behind them, Leti is driving forward and you see that there is a car coming this way into them. And Tick's like, Leti, and she was like, I see it. So she's like putting her foot on the floor and this car is still coming. And, it's a matter of seconds not to hit. And as she passes the car, which is silver and very nice. I don't know cars. My son says it's a Rolls Royce. I don't know. I don't do cars. I like fast and pretty. Shiny things excite me. That's pretty much it for me. So as they pass the car, it gets in between them and the good old boys and kind of, maneuvers around to distort the view of the people shooting at them. Then the car makes a sudden turn and stop, and the good old boys hit a force field. Don't hit the car, hit a force field, smash the front of their truck, flips it over, they go flying. After that stops, after the vehicle stopped moving, Leti has stopped to look behind her, and they see that a white lady in a very knockout hat, because again, Dana Pink is on it with these costumes, steps out of the car. So this is our first introduction to Christina BraithWhite, though they don't know her name yet. And Christina BraithWhite is played by Abbey Lee, who is very, very tall. Apparently, she was a model. She's like 5'10". She's like huge. She's like the girl Andre the Giant or something. So that's their introduction to her, and we'll find out more about her as the series goes along. After Tick, Leti, and Uncle George get the lowdown on Bedford County and Artem from Letitia's brother. I'm drawing a blank. What's that dude's name? I forget. I'll tell you in a minute. Y'all remember, I talked about him earlier. I'm really just drawing a blank right now. But after they get that information from him, and he tells them that there had been stories of disappearances and people being mauled by animals, and then he says that he doesn't know what's worse: the people who are mauled by the animals that they aren't sure what they are, or those who come up missing after encountering Sheriff Eustace and his deputies. And I'm thinking, because Eustace is not that man's last name, it's his first, I think. But either way, after all of that, George goes to call his family and check in, just let them know that they made it or whatever. And he's talking to Diana, and she explains to him the comic Orinthia Blue that she drew. And in the comic, she says she's explaining that Orinthia Blue goes to fix time machines and telescopes and observatories and things like that, which may be a little foretelling and foreshadowing for some episodes in the future. And then when he speaks to Hippolyta, he says, maybe on the next guide trip, you and I can go together. So remember earlier when they talked about her going out and he was saying how dangerous that was. He's now saying, the next time we'll go together. We'll do that together. It's not something that I will continue to keep you from as if I'm protecting you, because I'll go with you so you won't be alone. Then he pulls a picture out of his wallet as he's folding up the travel guide and putting it back into his wallet. He pulls out a photo. Now I don't know who this lady is. I don't know who she is in the picture or in the show. I don't know who she is in real life. I've never seen this lady in anything. But I just made the assumption that it was a picture of a young Hippolyta that he carried in his wallet, and that her younger self was played by a different actress. I assumed wrong, but then you know what they say about those who assume. So in the future, or episode 2, it will become clear who this lady is in the picture that Uncle George pulls out. After dinner and discussions about the guidebook in Bedford County and Devon County and their next stops, heading to Artem, Ruby and her brother are arguing inside the house. Sorry, I'm chewing gum, trying to move it out of my way so that it's not being grossly shown to you while I'm talking. So Tick is standing outside in the front yard where you can obviously hear them. It's a summer night, the windows are up. And Uncle George comes outside and says it's not sounding good. Meanwhile, in the house, in the discussion, Marvin, that's his name, Marvin and Leti are arguing about money. and her staying there and why she needs to stay there. And she doesn't have any money. So she's saying, I'll pull my weight, I'll cook, I'll clean. I won't be a burden to you if you let me stay here. And he said, I just sent you money when you were in DC. What did you do with it? She said, I used that money to get the bus to go to Ruby's. He said, you lying. What did you do with that money? And then she admits that she used the money to bail her friends out of jail. And she said, but it's not what you think. And he was like, it doesn't matter what I think. You didn't use the money for what I sent it to you for. You said you needed the money to come home, and you missed your own mother's funeral. And she's angry that he and Ruby keep bringing that up. And she says him and Ruby want to play like their mother was the same. She's fucking tired of it. And he was like, don't talk like that in my house, especially when you're talking about our mama. And she was like, I'm over it. Mama was not this great person that you guys want to make her out to be, but you would know that. You would think she's the best because you didn't have to live with her. And he's saying, I came up every summer to Chicago. And she was like, yeah, you came every summer, but then you got to come back home. You didn't have to live with her. And so they're going on and the argument's getting ugly. So when Uncle George comes outside to Tick, he makes mention of that. And Tick says, I've heard worse. I've been a part of worse. And then he asked if Montrose had mentioned to George what happened the last time he was at home. And he goes on to tell that a journalist came and wanted to do a story and about him being a Negro in the military. And Montrose was upset by that and said, not only are you crazy enough to throw your life away for a country that don't give a damn about you, now you're going to encourage other people to do it. And Montrose, we find, is physically abusive to Tick at this point. We learn that. And Tick says, at this point, this time, I gave as good as I got. So if you remember that I said earlier, when Tick came into the apartment and he goes into the bedroom and there's the red walls and there's damage to the walls, we learn here that he and Montrose got into a fight. Montrose tried to put him through that wall. So that's roughly his head, has been pushed through that wall. But this time he was not a defenseless child. He was a trained army soldier and he fought Montrose back. And then Uncle George tries to make excuses for why Montrose had that anger and that violence that trickled down to the abuse of Atticus. And George goes on to say, because listening to Atticus's conversation and how he talks about his father, even though he's on this quest right now to find his father, you would think that they don't have the best relationship and you'd be wondering why is he trying to find his father. But he was saying that even though it seems like his father didn't care, he did, because Tick saying, and all the time I was in Korea and in country, he never wrote me, not once. And George goes on to say how he would come over every night and not leave. He would never ask about Tick. He would wait for him to come up in conversation. And if he didn't come up in conversation, that he would stay around until George finally gave him some tidbit of information that, he received a letter from Tick or he had spoken with Tick. And I guess I don't understand this, because if you care about your kid, you care about your kid. Why can't you be open about that? But I guess that depends on your upbringing and your view on things. Because at this point, it seems like he's not really a great father. And it's like, if I were Atticus at this point, I would be done with him. I'm an adult. I don't have to put up with that crap anymore. But yet, he's on this journey to someplace populated on Dee's map by the Grim Reaper to find his father. And of course, the Grim Reaper symbolizing death. Guess that something could be found there, but he's going anyway. And as the conversation makes Tick angry, George says, Montrose did the best he can because he never had it easy with our father. And then he goes on, he starts to explain what he means by that, and then he stops. And he says he was younger and smaller, and I regret not taking care of him, not looking out for him. And Tick asked the question, I was younger, I was smaller. Do you regret not taking care of me either? Because apparently it was no secret that Atticus was being physically abused by his father. And the way that I'm getting this is not so much that it was abuse in the sense of, anything wicked or wretched. It was abuse in the sense of, I think I'm doing right by parenting, but maybe my parenting skills are not the best, and this is not the way that I should go and handle that, and everybody can see that but me. So he's whipping Tick for things that probably don't require no whipping. And I know some of you are like, what does require whipping? I understand that some people choose not to spank, some people do. That is your own preference. Not even going to go into it. But in this situation, that is how I will explain it. And so Tick was a victim of his father's anger, and that anger usually manifested itself in violence or a whipping for Tick. But another thing that we notice is that Uncle George says your father took the brunt of it. So that means that their father also may have, what he determined as discipline may have been abuse. And both George and Montrose were subject to it, but Montrose a little more. That's what I'm gathering from this. And then the next morning, when they're about to shove off, thinking that they've gone halfway and Letty's going to stay with Marvin, she comes out with her suitcases, gets in the car, closes the door, and doesn't say a word. They look at each other like, okay. So they thought they were dropping her off. She's actually going to continue on. Now, I will throw this little side note in because I thought it was really, really cool. In the novel, it does not go down like that. And she kind of hides in the car and steals away. And they don't know she's there until a very pivotal moment when they're thanking God that she's there. So you guys may want to read the Matt Ruff novel, Lovecraft Country, if you have not already. After Uncle George and Tick kind of finish their conversation about his dad and his violence, you hear Leti inside saying, let go of my arm, you're hurting me. And you hear Marvin say, go, I don't want you in my house another night. Still, they had no idea that she was going to be coming with him in the morning. And when Atticus was looking like he was going to go in and intervene, Uncle George told him to stay out of it. It was family business. And personally, I know how that comes up where you see a situation that is just not right, doesn't sit well with you, but you don't know how to handle it because it is somebody's family business, or it's business that doesn't pertain to you. The situation doesn't affect you, but it affects you because you're witnessing it, that type of thing. And you don't know when it's okay to interject and step in and when it's not. You don't want to overstep your bounds, but you don't want to see this thing go on either. And I think that's where Atticus was, both just as a human being and as someone who has been on the wrong end of violence. And then also as someone whose feelings for Leti are maturing. And at the end of that conversation, it's thundering and lightning. And then it cuts to the next morning where it's cloudy, but a beautiful morning. No rain in sight, no storm. And I think it's kind of that, the calm after the storm. I think that's what the alliteration there was. So after Leti invites herself on for the rest of the trip, as I said, her signature color, of course, is red. She comes out of the house wearing, and always these sleeveless midriff button downs with collars. I'm loving it. And the accents on the pockets and the collar are red, and she has on like red pedal pushers with nude flats. And it's important to also acknowledge the fact that Woody is red, which I said earlier, that Uncle George and Tick are going over something in a tin, square tin, which is also red. And Uncle George this day is wearing a red tie as they drive into Devon County. Cut to the car. Apparently, they've been driving around Devon County all day looking for this bridge that leads over into Artem, and they can't find it. And everybody's getting a little frustrated. Road trip, close quarters, even if it's just 3 people in a car. So, tempers are starting to flare, especially between Uncle George and Tick. Now, my own opinion and observation of this is that it's a carryover from the conversation in the storm the night before, when Tick feels like his uncle didn't protect him from his father, knowing what was going on and knowing his temperament. That's just something I came up with. I haven't heard anybody else that co-signs that, but that's my thing. So he yells about finding the road that could possibly be grown over, and so he says, pull the car over, I'll get out and look. And Uncle George says, oh, you're going to get out and look for a road ain't none of us seen all damn day. Okay, go ahead. So he pulls the car over. Tick gets out, starts like shit, he's just frustrated and letting it out. He hears the door open. He never turns around. He just says, what are you doing? And Leti says, I'm helping you look. It was like, thinking about what my brother said, I don't want to be out here after dark. And he says, I know. So they're standing at the woods, and there's a rustling in the leaves. And she says, oh my God, what is that? And he says, a shoggoth. And she says, what is that? And he says, a big blob of a monster with hundreds of eyes. Now, for me, it is important to notice that while he's having this conversation with her about a fictional monster, the sheriff car, or a real life monster, is pulling up behind them. So the sheriff instructs them to come to the back of the car and instructs Uncle George to get out of the car. Now, right before the sheriff instructs them, before they know that the sheriff is there, Leti says, well, I'm not afraid of a blob. We could outrun a blob. And Tick says Uncle George can't, which I thought was like crazy, like they really just threw Uncle George under the bus like that. But if you recall from earlier, Uncle George has 2 shattered knees from being attacked by racists outside of Anna. So then the cop pulls up. The cop's a complete and total jerk and jackass, as would be expected. And he asks them if they know what a sundown town is. And Uncle George says, yes, sir, we do. And he says, well, this is a sundown county, and you got about 7 minutes before the sun goes down. And then they were like, we don't want no problems. We just stopped to go to the bathroom. And the sheriff says something like, if I'd have come up on you niggas pissing in my woods after dark, I would have been obligated to hang you, or something equally racist and ignorant. And so he said, well, it's, the sun, Tick says, if the sun goes down in 7 minutes, I'll be out of your county in 6. And the sheriff says, that's impossible, heading the direction you're heading. And he says, all right, I'll go the other way. Sheriff looks at his watch, say, you just might make it. Tick walks back over to the vehicle and then turns around because, he's a thinking man. And he says, is it legal for me to make a U-turn? And the sheriff replies, you're a smart nigga. Say, I like that. Said, any other time if you were to make a U-turn, I would have to give you a ticket. But if you ask nicely, I'll let you go. So Tick says, can I make a U-turn? And the sheriff, in all of his white privilege and ignorance, has to emasculate and belittle him. He can't just let him go because it's just not in his fucking nature. So he makes him say, so after Atticus says, please, the sheriff says, oh, you can do better than that. Say, will you please let this smart nigga make a U-turn here? And you see Leti's face, and it's anguish and fear. It's anguish that they're being subjected to that, and it's fear that Atticus has had enough, and he gonna pop off on this dude who has a shotgun on his shoulder, and he's going to get killed. That's what I see. This has not been, co-signed by anybody associated with the show. This is just what I see. And he says it, and I hurt. Just when he says it, it hurts. Just like, that they had to endure such things. And he makes a U-turn, and they can only go 25 miles an hour. And the cop is following them. And they cannot go any faster than 25 miles an hour because the cop has already told them that if they speed, he's going to pull them over. Now, my theory was, and of course I'm thinking with a 1980 to 2020 mindset, there's three of them, there's only one of him. I'd have whipped his ass. But he does have a shotgun, so that may even the odds just a little bit. And, their first reaction, even though Tick would probably fly his head if he could, their first reaction was not violence. Their first reaction was not to fight someone who wasn't actively fighting them, even though he was degrading and emasculating and just racist and ignorant. So the cop follows him and starts to, smash him on the rear end while they're trying to do no more than 25 miles an hour to not give him a reason to do anything more to them. They think they've gotten away and they run into a roadblock of cops after making it past the county line before the sun sets. So when they run into the roadblock, the cops take them out of the car at gunpoint and walk them off into the woods with every intention to disappear them, accusing them of robberies in Bideford County. They try to explain that they're just travelers from Chicago. They don't know anything about that. The sheriff's like, yeah, I already know what your story is going to be, blah, 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 boom, bap, bip. And we're not buying it. Now, remember earlier when I said that there was an overvoice playing when Tick was in the future and the past and present right at the same time. That was making like the white women were delicate and didn't need to see the ugly side of racism and what white men were willing to do to other human beings just because of the color of their skin. We find that when the police grab our three heroes, we'll call them, Leti, Tick, and Uncle George, they don't have the same care or consideration for Leti as a woman as they do for their own women. So she's thrown to the ground with Uncle George and Tick. They're all having guns pulled on them. And then they hear some noises. And Talbert, one of Sheriff Eustace's men, said, what's that? And he was saying some animal. And he was like, no, that don't, sound like an animal. Enter the Shoggoth, which we now find is not just a fictional character, but actually a character in Lovecraft Country that pops out. And these Shoggoths, who are these blobs that Leti thinks, not scary, we can overrun, start eating people and, ripping them in half with their teeth. And it becomes a complete and utter bloodbath. So Leti's wearing the white shirt with the red accents. When this is all over, the shirt's just red. The three of them are covered in blood. A lot of the deputies are killed by the Shoggoths. While the Shoggoths are eating and mutilating the police, Tick, Leti, and Uncle George get up and start to run. One of the cops bumps into Uncle George and knocks him down on the ground. Uncle George just stays there because, as we know, his knees are shot. Anyway, Tick and Leti run off. They find a cabin and they lock themselves in it. Talbert and Sheriff Eustace Hunt, that's his name, Sheriff Hunt, Eustace Hunt. It comes back to me as it plays in my head. They bully their way in with a shotgun, like, open this door, and when they say no, they start shooting in the door, so they open it up and let them in. And then they come in with their guns and their white privilege and bully them and start telling them what to do. Okay, we found this damn cabin, not you, buddy. But before that, before the cops get there, Tick is worried about Uncle George, like, where's Uncle George? And Leti is like, if you don't get your ass in this cabin, Uncle George is probably done for. Get in here. And then he wants to go out and look for Uncle George. And the cops are bullying him and like, no, Well, Uncle George wanders to the cabin. He gets away, wanders to the cabin, and they pull him in. And Letty's, touching him, feeling him up, make sure he's not punctured or wounded in any way, and asks him if he's okay. And he said, well, that depends on your definition of okay. And then he explains that these characters are somewhat like the vampires from Dracula, which happens to be Uncle George's favorite book. And that'll come into play later as well. So remember, I said it. And he says, they tend to shy away from the light. Just think about it. All day long, we've been wandering these woods looking for that bridge. Never found the bridge, but we never found any monsters either until the sun went down. And that kind of plays for the Shoggoths and the white police officers. And so he said, and I feel like they feel like Dracula vampires. So they were like the headlights and the flares, and Woody would help. And Tick says he's going to go back to get it, and he asks Talbot, "Where's the car?" And Talbot tells him where the car is, and he's like, he's going to go. And then Sheriff Hunt's like, "Nah, you one of them little smart niggas. You'll probably run off and leave us here." She goes, and Tick's like, "I'll be damned, that's not happening." And Letty's like, no, I can do it. Remember, I was on the track team. I can run. I'm fast. And then she tells him, which is hilarious because there is so much comedy in these serious bits. And she says, "I know you say you don't need them glasses to drive at night. Right now is not the time to test that theory." So Letty runs to get the car. She hears the monster. She hears the screams. They're still ripping the other police apart and stuff. And she's just running, full speed, head up. Let's, get to this car and get this stuff. So while she's running for the car, Uncle George and Tick are back with Sheriff Hunt and Deputy Talbot. And Sheriff Hunt started having some problems. Uncle George says, "What happens when you're bit by a vampire?" Tick says, "You turn into one." And they're looking at Sheriff Hunt, who does not have an arm anymore. That's another thing. Lots of arms ripped off. Remember, I said it. So Sheriff Hunt's arm is ripped off from the shoulder socket. He got flat. Shoggoth got in him. And he's starting to change, and stuff is looking really weird. And Uncle George looks at Deputy Talbot and says, "You, you, you need to shoot him." Deputy Talbot hesitates and gets his face and neck and all this ripped out. That's another thing. That's another, remember I said it. This show is notorious for jacking somebody's mouth up. And like I said, I don't do horror, and this shit be scaring me. I swear, these mouths are like terrible. And as the episodes go along, there will be more mouths to terrify me. I don't know how you deal with it. Oh, it scares the hell out of me. So, Sheriff Hunt turns into a Shoggoth and proceeds to eat Deputy Talbert's fucking mouth and throat out. And Tick gets the gun and they fucking shoot him, and it doesn't kill him. And just then, Leti has had her own encounters with the Shoggoths in the car. And she running their asses over and turning headlights on them or whatever. She drives Woody back through the woods to the cabin. Through the cabin. I kind of felt like she ran over Uncle George. I kind of did. And hit the Shoggoth. And then they heard, all the other Shoggoths coming around and circling the cabin. And Uncle George is down because, like I said, I really believe Letty hit him with his damn car. And so they drag Uncle George into the headlights to keep him safe in the lights. And they get the flares out of Woody, and they throw the flares as, a protective arc around them. Then there's this ear-piercing whistle, kind of like a dog whistle. And all the Shoggoths barrel into the ground like moles. And they're just gone. And our heroes walk off without Woody because it's shot up and now has run through a cabin. And it's in the cabin wall. Everybody's dead but the three of them. And they walk off and they find this bridge that they've been looking for all day long. And then this great open space after the bridge, and this beautiful, huge manor house with immaculate grounds. And this is what they've been looking for the whole time. So they walk up to it, and then you see the silver car again. The silver car that Christina BraithWhite was driving at her introduction when she stopped the good old boys on their tail after leaving Miss Lydia's restaurant. And it's parked there like, Christina BraithWhite lives here. This is her car. When they get to the door, it just opens up. And there is William, played by Jordan Patrick Smith. And he says, "Welcome home, Mr. Freeman." And that's how the episode ends. So I'm sorry it took me 2 hours to tell you about a 1 hour show. But like I said, there is so much stuff packed in it, and I like to talk. And I have opinions about everything. So it becomes a 2 hour video. I hope you guys can endure and watch it because there's, like I said, there's stuff there. There's some Easter eggs there for you. So I hope that you can endure this long video, and I promise the second one will not be this long. Thank you. T signing out. T's Corner.